As Jim and Carl had mentioned, did have a chance to sit down with former chairman and CEO of GE, Jeff Immelt. He's out with a new book. It's coming out tomorrow, I believe, but he's been doing a lot of interviews around it. And he's willing to, well, entertain a lot of questions, of course, about his tenure, one in which, as we well know, the stock price suffered, as along with many, of course, of long-term investors in GE. We sat down for roughly an hour. We're going to make that available on CNBC.com, hopefully later today, but did want to share at least a brief back and forth. You know, Immelt contends, and certainly you have to admit, he perhaps was not nearly as lucky as his predecessor, Jack Welch, when it came to, well, just all sorts of different events. Take a listen. You do seem to indicate that you believe you were just in many ways unlucky. Is this another example of being unlucky, or at some point do you make your own luck or lack of it?
Oh, gosh. I think, David, if you read the book, I'm harder on myself than I am on anybody else. And you know, I made my own decisions, and I'll take the consequences for that and let it stand where it might. But I am very tough on myself as I write this book. Do I think volatility and market risk and things like that matter in terms of somebody's tenure? Sure, it does. But I am tougher on myself than anybody else. For anybody that reads the book, you're going to see that.
Well, I read every page, and you are. But you also deliver blame in other areas. You know, you certainly... Steve Bowles, I mean, who ran Power. You don't spare any niceties for him, or I should say there aren't many for him. You wrote, maybe the worst mistake I ever made was listening to the board and not firing him. So it's not as though, Jeff, you just fully take the blame. I mean, you're saying there were a lot of other things going on that and people who failed you, aren't you?
You know, Dave, again, I'd start by saying I'm tougher on myself than I am on anybody else. But the Power and Alstom story has been written and rewritten and observed by you and by others for 4 years. And I felt like there was a need to have a complete telling of how we did the Alstom deal, what has been a really good business in Power for a long time, and then, you know, issues we had with execution. So, you know, as I say in the book, if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't do the Alstom deal, but it was a complicated deal with difficult markets where we didn't have a team aligned with execution. And I, again, own that, as does the board, in terms of where we were positioned at that time. So all I try to do, David, is tell a complete story so people could have a complete answer.
Immelt says trying to add a lot of context to so much of what has been out there. We're going to have a lot more, of course, of that. Jim, you know, we've spent a lot of time talking about Mr. Immelt. We certainly, at least we have in the past. It was fascinating to sit down with him for an hour and go over so many things. And I look forward to sharing more from our conversation.
Remorse, giving money back to the shareholders, feeling that perhaps he was overcompensated, didn't understand. I don't think it's luck that you bought oil high. I don't think it's luck that you bought infrastructure high. Any thought at all about how money should have been clawed back?
Well, clawed back, no. We certainly talked about, as we had actually, frankly, in some interviews that we did towards the end of his tenure, of you know, buying high and selling low, and how that can have a dramatically negative impact over a long period of time. Didn't get into oil and gas as much as perhaps we should have, but we certainly spent a lot of time on Alstom, which was the last big deal, one of the largest. You know, Amersham now, he certainly defends as a deal and says it paid off a great more than they paid for it. And I do remember us criticizing that deal way back. That was somewhat early in his tenure, the Amersham deal, selling obviously NBCU to Comcast, perhaps at a much lower valuation that could have been the case. And then GE Capital. That really is what colors so much of his tenure, Jim. And to be fair, he inherited it. It was 40% of earnings. It rose to 50%, and then the financial crisis hit. And it sort of colors so much of what actually occurred during all those Immelt years.
Long-term care and how it was not fully disclosed.
Yep. Yeah, we talked about it.
Wind accounting and how it was non-common.
Mm-hmm. We talked a bit about it.
Nice guy, fun.
Yes, all those things.
Mattered. I mean, I don't mean that facetiously. I always enjoyed Jeff's company. And then when the projections failed so badly, David, we all kind of shrugged our shoulders initially, but then it was repeated failure to make the numbers. And you went from feeling that Jeff is a guy who has got a lot of vision to being a guy who couldn't execute.
Right. It's this word success theater is what's used in some of the books about GE. We addressed that to some extent as well. Obviously, so much to get to, and even an hour, not enough time to sort of encompass a 16-plus year career as CEO, and obviously 35 years at the company. But certainly going to share what we can from it and encourage people to as well view it online, Carl, when we have the full interview. I believe it will be available as well. And the book, I read it. Pretty good read.
Yeah.
Pretty good read. Enjoyed it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wonder if the people at GE are working or watching. I bet you they're working.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.